naintindi yung English na may is ka, may point na may is ka. Pati nga yung alam mo yung very, very no-no sana sa Pilipinas. Ganon-ganon sa kanila. Mahal kasi siguro.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the annual Southeast Asia Forum on Sustainable Capture Fisheries, ASEAF-SCF, with the theme Leveraging Southeast Asia Business Competitiveness through Combating IUU Fishing and Protecting Human Rights in Fisheries. My name is Rati Putri, and I will be your host for today. This event is organized by the Coordinating Committee for Maritime and Investment Affairs and the Foundation for International Human Rights Reporting Standards, or FIRST. Before we start the event, we would like to express our gratitude for the Honorable Bapak Basilio Diaz Arujo, Deputy Minister for Coordination of Maritime, Sovereignty and Energy, Coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investment of Indonesia, Bapak Insinyur Muhammad Zaini, Director General of Capture Fisheries, Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries of the Republic of Indonesia, Bapak Jody Mahardi, Deputy Coordinating Minister for Maritime Resources, Coordinating Ministry for Maritime and Investment Affairs, Pak Marzuki Darusman, the Chair of FIRST, for attending this forum either in person or virtually. We also would like to thank all the speakers and participants for joining this event. We will now start today's forum with the opening and key remarks. The opening remarks will be delivered by Bapak Basilio Diaz Araujo, Deputy Minister for Coordination of Maritime Sovereignty and Energy, Coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investment of Indonesia. To Bapak Basilio, you may have the floor.
Excellencies, Permanent Representative Secretary of Indonesia to ASEAN, His Excellency Ambassador Dery Aman, the Ambassador of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, His Excellency Ta Van Tong, which is present online, respective representatives or DG of Capture Fisheries of the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries of Indonesia, Mr. Muhammad Zaini, Deputy DG of the Ministry of Agriculture of the Kingdom of Cambodia, Mr. Intrai, the Deputy Chief Mission Embassy of the Philippines in Jakarta, Chairman of Indonesian Traditional Fisher Folk Union, Minister, Diplomatic Rank for Economic Affairs and Development of Embassy of Japan in Jakarta, Assistant Director for Food, Agriculture and Forestry Division of ASEAN Secretariat, Director of the Center for Sustainable Development Studies from Cambodia, and Coordinator for Southeast Asia Regional for the International Transport Workers Federation, Thailand.
Recording in progress.
Representative from FAO, Human Rights Specialist, Ms. Ana Maria Suarez Dusan. Welcome, Ms. Suarez Dusan to Bali. From Rome, Emeritus Professor, Kasatart University, Thailand, and the chair of FIRST, Foundation for International Human Rights Reporting Standards. Of course, we have our co-founders, the used to be Attorney General, Bapak Marzuki Darusman, the co-host founder of FIRST, Excellency Ambassador Makarim Wibisono, but is not with us today here. And of course, our friend, Professor Dina Prapto Raharja, PhD, who is also present with us here today. And of course, my colleague, used to be my minister, Professor Indrayono Susilo, and of course, the respective speakers who are present here today. Good morning to all of us, all of you, and then Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And from Bali, we say Om Swastiastu. I will be straight to the point. We all know that the value of illegal fishing and trade is estimated to be upwards of 36.4 billion each year. Some of the illegal fishing activities are still linked with practices of violations, such as human rights violations, forced labor, human trafficking, child labor, and of course, others. And for those of us who still remember Benjina case, I think we still have other cases which are not mentioned here. A lot of energy has been devoted to combat overfishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, as well as human rights violation at sea. In recent years, deficiencies in the fisheries control systems have led us to cooperate strongly. And we remember Indonesia has ever initiated one, at the beginning it was a convention, and then it came up to a proposed agreement for an agreement, and then this agreement is still under negotiation for some years. And I think that shows how countries, not only in ASEAN, but also countries, the market countries are also involved. We also involved in the designing of these supposed to be an agreement, or a convention that was thought at the time. And of course, this expresses the collective efforts in responding to the very critical situations, especially in fisheries sector. Of course, sustainability is the red line connecting sustainable fisheries reform. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that information is the power that authorities need to detect bad and illegal behaviors at seas, and to hold those who abuse the system accounted for. Therefore, it is essential to ensure that maritime law enforcement shall apply in terms of adopting greater data sharing and promoting openness between countries. This strategic cooperation will allow the whole sector, including private companies, governments, and civil society, to learn from each other and to maximize maritime technology adoption. So these tools can deliver on their potential. For example, the vessel monitoring systems. Indonesia has been trying to use this system to monitor vessels in our country. I hope that other countries are also doing the same. Promotion and education of the political decision-making level, data collection and reporting mechanisms across global regional seafood supply chain, and etc. Of course, including in the ratification of international conventions. The main priority of the government of Indonesia is to elevate the sustainable capture fisheries through cooperation, such as the G7, ASEAN, G20, United Nations, and of course, the annual Southeast Asia Forum on Sustainable Capture Fisheries that we have today. We have to seek the support of technology to reduce illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. We have to create universal standards and numerous sustainable capture fisheries improvement projects in Indonesia and of course in our countries. We will use the results of this forum to help, of course, guiding the investment to our countries and to continue to promote sustainability for the future of our maritime sector and of course our whole oceans. I am confident that today and tomorrow's discussion will enhance our ability to together prevent the practices of IUU fishing by strengthening national and regional enforcement systems. We look forward to cooperate with all of you to secure the necessary enforcement authorities to prevent illegally harvest or falsely labeled fish from being sold in the in Indonesia and the world. And to level excuse me. And to level the playing field for Indonesian fisheries industry and of course the fishing industries of all the participating countries that are present today in this forum. And to bring about fundamental reform of the fisheries control systems, satellite control, inspections, laws, effective sanctions, and to demonstrate our continued leadership in the global fight against IUU fishing. And Indonesia has also learned a lot from other countries. For example, I have been invited to Thailand to learn how inspections are done in Thailand. I was brought by ILO to South Africa to see how the inspections are done on fishing vessels. So these are practices that we can collaborate together to see what practices other countries are doing, how we can then share this type of experience together. I have high expectations that this forum will reiterate our strong commitment to disentangle these crimes from one and another, and to protect those vulnerable to fisheries exploitation and enhance livelihoods and social well-being. Thank you and enjoy the discussions of today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Basilio, for the opening remarks. Now we are going to listen to the remarks from Pak Jody Mahardi, Deputy Coordinating Minister for Maritime Resources, Coordinating Ministry for Maritime and Investment Affairs. Pak Jody Mahardi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. I would like to express my deepest appreciation to all of you, despite your busy schedule in gracing this event. And especially thank you for Pak Basilio and team and every parties involved who have been instrumental in putting this event together. Yeah. So please accept my sincere appreciation in making possible this annual Southeast Asia Forum on Sustainable Capture Fisheries. I think this represents another testament to our unrelenting interest to further strengthen our committed partnership for continued mutual benefit and sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, Southeast Asian free market agreements have increased the competitiveness of the ASEAN region fisheries as a world fishery production base and a robust market for fishery products. As a maritime region whose strength relies on marine and fishery resources, these strengths must apply sustainability principles that balance ecological and economic interests. The blue economy principle has become essential in the capture fisheries industry business. There are 4 areas for potential IUU fishing in Indonesia, namely the Natuna Sea, the North Sulawesi Sea, Malacca Strait, and the Arafura Sea. During the 2015 to 2021 period, data revealed 462 cases of IUU fishing, and the potential loss due to this IUU fishing could reach to 240 trillion rupiah per year. These fraudulent practices of capture fisheries not only ignore the sustainability of natural resources, but it also affect the competitive fishery business and create governance problem for fishing vessel crew that lead to human rights violations. So Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries are the most significant contributors to fishery workers. Unfortunately, the number of exploitation, neglect, or human rights violation cases is still very high. During the 2017 to 2020 period, there were 5,371 cases of negligence and exploitation experienced by Indonesian sailors and fishing vessel crew. So Southeast Asian Fisheries Regional Cooperation, the Southeast Asian Fisheries Development Center, needs to strengthen the commitment and agreement between all leaders of Southeast Asian countries. Support from countries importing global fishery products is also necessary to ensure proper protection from the state and capture fishery business that do not guarantee the safety and traceability of fishery products and practices that violate human rights. Indonesia, as the country with the largest fishery potential in Southeast Asia, is expected to be able to build a global agreement to protect fish products in the worldwide market from fraudulent and unfair capture fisheries practices. Diplomacy in sustainable and competitive capture fishery business agreement in the Southeast Asian region, I think, must be aimed at ensuring the achievements such as regulating regional fishing vessels record, electronic ASEAN CATS documentation scheme, and port state measures, which also include promotion of sustainable fisheries in the ASEAN region through the Regional Plan of Action on Sustainable Utilization of Narcotic Tunas in the ASEAN Regional Agreement Arrangement, or Regional Action Plans on the Sustainable Utilization of Narcotic Tunas in the ASEAN region, and then ensuring food safety and quality of fish and fishery products, and development of a digitalization-based system to control the activities of fishing vessels and the protection of fishing vessel crew, and development of blended finance or philanthropy to ensure sustainable funding and encourage the role of fishery business sectors in protecting marine conservation areas. And lastly, protect the socio-economic life of small-scale fisheries. They are part of efforts to reduce poverty and food safety. So I would like to thank the initiator of this forum, and I hope it will generate the best solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Jody, for the remarks. I now welcome the Director General of Capture Fisheries, Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries, Bapak Insinyur Muhammad Zaini, to deliver his key remarks. Bapak Muhammad Zaini, you may have the floor.
Saya Muhammad Zaini Hanafi mewakili Menteri Kelautan dan Perikanan. Oleh karenanya saya akan membacakan sambutan Menteri Kelautan dan Perikanan pada acara The Annual Southeast Asia Forum on Sustainable Capture Fisheries. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Yang saya hormati Menteri Koordinator Bidang Kemaritiman dan Investasi, Bapak Luhut Binsar Panjaitan. Yang saya hormati Bapak Deputi, yang saya hormati para duta besar yang hadir pada acara ini, yang saya hormati Gubernur Bali Bapak Iwayan Koster, yang saya hormati Ketua FIH-RRST Bapak Marzuki Darusman, serta hadirin sekalian yang hadir pada acara pada hari ini, baik online maupun offline. Puji syukur kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, Tuhan yang Maha Kuasa, yang senantiasa melimpahkan rahmat dan kesehatan bagi kita semua, sehingga dapat hadir dalam acara di annual Southeast Asia Forum on Sustainable Capture Fisheries. Bapak Ibu hadirin yang saya hormati, sebagai negara dengan jumlah penduduk yang sangat besar keempat di dunia yang berjumlah 270 juta jiwa, laut menyediakan sumber pangan dan pekerjaan untuk jutaan masyarakat di wilayah pesisir. Di saat yang bersamaan, berbagai kegiatan ekonomi yang memanfaatkan laut juga tumbuh dengan pesat. Partisipasi aktif Indonesia dalam High Level Panel Sustainable Ocean Economy dan kepresidenan Indonesia di G20 tahun ini memungkinkan Indonesia untuk mengatasi dan berbagi bagaimana kita menangani tantangan di lautan kita. Untuk itu, Indonesia berkomitmen menciptakan laut yang sehat, aman, tangguh, dan produktif bagi kesejahteraan bangsa dengan strategi pembangunan ekonomi biru yang menitikberatkan pada pertimbangan ekologi dan ekonomi pada aktivitas yang menetap di ruang laut. Bapak Ibu sekalian hadirin yang saya hormati, untuk memastikan perikanan yang berkelanjutan, Indonesia memberlakukan kebijakan penangkapan ikan melalui sistem kuota berdasarkan jumlah stok populasinya yang akan dikenal dengan kebijakan penangkapan ikan terukur. Wilayah dan kuota khusus dialokasikan untuk komunitas nelayan lokal dan tradisional. Hal ini akan menempatkan masyarakat sebagai salah satu penerima manfaat utama dari ekonomi perikanan dan kelautan. Selain untuk mengatasi penangkapan ikan yang berlebihan dan melestarikan populasi ikan, kebijakan penangkapan ikan berbasis kuota juga untuk menghilangkan stigma IUU fishing di Indonesia dan mengubahnya menjadi penangkapan ikan yang legal, reported, dan regulated. Melalui penangkapan ikan terukur yang berbasis kuota, kita akan menjaga keberlanjutan sumber daya ikan yang kita miliki, meningkatkan pertumbuhan ekonomi di wilayah terpencil, dan meningkatkan kesejahteraan nelayan-nelayan kita. Bapak Ibu hadirin yang saya hormati, pemerintah sangat memperhatikan perbaikan tata kelola untuk menjamin terlindungnya warga negara Indonesia yang bekerja di luar negeri, baik di kapal bendera asing, termasuk awak kapal perikanan Indonesia yang bekerja di luar negeri. Undang-Undang Nomor 18 Tahun 2017 tentang Perlindungan Pekerja Migran Indonesia telah mengamanatkan pengaturan, penempatan, dan perlindungan awak kapal dan pelaut perikanan melalui peraturan pemerintah. Perlindungan dan penempatan awak kapal perikanan dalam usaha penangkapan ikan tidak terlepas dari terpenuhinya persyaratan, baik dari saat perekrutan, penempatan, dan perlindungan serta pemenuhan persyaratan dokumen, kompetensi, keterampilan, maupun kontrak kerja atau perjanjian kerja laut bagi awak kapal perikanan. Perubahan tata kelola dari perusahaan perikanan didorong untuk menghormati hak-hak dasar bagi awak kapal perikanan melalui sertifikasi HAM perikanan. implementasi HAM untuk ABK kapal yang diberlakukan untuk penanaman modal asing dan kapal buatan luar negeri yang akan beroperasi di laut kita, sebagaimana diatur dalam Peraturan Menteri Kelautan dan Perikanan Nomor 35 Tahun 2015 dan Peraturan Menteri Kelautan dan Perikanan Nomor 42 Tahun 2016 tentang Perjanjian Kerja Laut bagi awak kapal perikanan, di mana salah satu kewajiban perusahaan perikanan adalah kepada awak kapal perikanannya harus memiliki PKL untuk bekerja di kapal perikanan. Bapak Ibu hadirin yang saya hormati, Indonesia tidak akan bisa menjaga laut kita sendiri. Jasa yang diberikan oleh Laut Indonesia kepada masyarakat regional dan global juga memerlukan tanggung jawab bersama. Untuk itu, kami membutuhkan dukungan dari negara sahabat di kawasan ASEAN dan bekerja bersama dalam memerangi IUU fishing, menjaga kelestarian sumber daya ikan, dan melindungi hak-hak para pekerja perikanan. Sekali lagi saya ucapkan terima kasih dan apresiasi. Saya yakin dengan sinergi dan kolaborasi seperti ini, maka pendekatan pengelolaan perikanan yang terukur dapat diimplementasikan dengan baik, serta dapat membawa sektor kita selangkah lebih maju, tentunya dengan berbasis pada daya dukung dan kelestarian sumber daya ikan dan lingkungannya, serta kesejahteraan seluruh lapisan masyarakat kelautan dan perikanan. Selamat melaksanakan diskusi, semoga seluruh upaya pemikiran waktu dan tenaga yang kita curahkan bersama menjadi catatan amal baik bagi kita semua. Tak lupa saya ucapkan terima kasih kepada seluruh panitia yang sudah bekerja keras untuk menyelenggarakan acara ini. Mudah-mudahan memberikan manfaat yang maksimal untuk pelestarian sumber daya ikan yang kita miliki. Demikian, billahi taufiq wal hidayah, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Santi, Santi, Santi Menteri Kelautan dan Perikanan Tertanda Sakti Wahyu Trenggono. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much for the remarks, Pak Zaini. Last but not least, I would like to welcome the Chair of FIRST, Bapak Marzuki Darusman, to deliver his key remarks. Pak Marzuki, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Putri, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start with an apology for not being able to be there with you in Bali. I just returned from a very long overseas trip, and I thought it would be best to recluse myself after a long trip due to the conditions, the health conditions overall. But nevertheless, the foundation, and also perhaps to apologize for, in behalf of Professor Makarim, also a founder of the foundation, who is chairing a select committee to constitute the new National Commission for Human Rights of Indonesia. So he was not able also to be with you in Bali. But be it as it may, I would like to join Pak Basilio and Pak Jody in behalf of the Coordinating Minister for Maritime Affairs, Pak Luhut Panjaitan, to welcome all the distinguished guests to this forum, and to thank also for the opening remarks delivered earlier, not the least by Director General Inter Muhammad Zaini, who had spoken in behalf of the Minister of Marine Affairs and Fisheries of the Republic of Indonesia, Mr. Sakti Wahyu Trenggono, and of course to welcome all our guests here today. Not to repeat what Pak Basilio has already listed down, and thanking of course those who have been able to take time out of your busy schedules to be with us here today. I want to thank also speakers and moderators who have joined this forum in person or virtually. We look forward to listening to your insights, thoughts and recommendations on achieving sustainable fisheries, combating illegal, unreported, unregulated IUU fishing, and protecting human rights in the fisheries industry. The area of Southeast Asia is the primary producer of fish and other fisheries products, which account for a quarter of fish production globally. As a result, the fishery industry plays a significant role in ASEAN member states regarding the economy, the development and welfare of these countries. Yet, the industry can negatively impact people's livelihoods, their rights, and the environment. The unsustainable practices in the fishery industry could threaten its existence, as there are increasing calls for sustainable investment globally, and the demand for ethically sourced goods is also rising. The government further institutionalizes the norm by issuing laws and regulations requiring business to conduct human rights due diligence. Therefore, Southeast Asian countries must work together to address these issues to ensure that their fisheries business remain competitive. To present the bigger picture, last month the ASEAN-US Special Summit produced a joint vision statement that includes commitment to curbing IUU fishing through sharing of information, best practices and expertise, as well as technical assistance which will complement the existing mechanisms. Furthermore, last week, WTO members successfully concluded the 12th Ministerial Conference in Geneva with unprecedented outcomes that includes a strong prohibition of subsidies contributing to IUU fishing, with unprecedented transparency provisions, which we certainly welcome, the results of which the ASEAN-US Special Summit and the weak WTO outcomes which will advance sustainability fisheries in Southeast Asia. Coming down to the local, the regional context, as a preparation for this forum, we have conducted regional peer learning events and focus group discussions with fisheries stakeholders from Indonesia, Cambodia, Thailand, and the Philippines. The results of these events showed us that, on the one hand, countries in Southeast Asia have taken some initiatives to tackle the unsustainable practices in the fishery industry. Thailand, for instance, became the first country in Southeast Asia to ratify ILO Convention 188, C188, which is Work in Fishing Convention, in 2019. Furthermore, Cambodia has worked with ILO and local NGOs to help prevent human rights violations in IUU practices. And Indonesia has also demonstrated its commitment to protect the fishers through the issuance of the Ministry of Fisheries regulation on human rights management system and certification for fishing companies. On the other hand, there is a consensus from the event's participants that there is a need for more multi-actor cooperation in combating IUU fishing, protecting human rights, and empowering artisanal fisheries. This forum aims to address this need and will facilitate the exchange of information between fisheries stakeholders in Southeast Asia on sustainable fisheries to increase the competitiveness of Southeast Asia capture fisheries. Following the completion of this forum, the organizers will submit a set of recommendations to the G20, the governments of Southeast Asian countries, and the Southeast Asia Regional Cooperation related to sustainable fisheries. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are assembled here for a very historic moment. What we will be doing will be a step towards a new regional relations that is more open, more inclusive with regard to stakeholders, and therefore I congratulate the forum and thank all the participants for being here today. And once again, thank you for joining this event, and I wish you all fruitful discussions throughout this forum during this two-day session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Marzuki, for the key remarks. Now, we will move on to the next session, the high-level plenary meeting on the current state of sustainable fisheries in the Southeast Asia region. This session will be facilitated by Dr. Insinyur Dwi Suryo Indroyono Susilo, MSc, the Coordinating Minister for Maritime Affairs from 2014 to 2015. I now invite the facilitator and all the speakers to come to the podium. Prof. Indroyono, I now invite you to lead the session.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bali again. I'd like to invite the speaker to sit with me. First of all, Mr. Basilio Arjo, the Minister of Economic Affairs, Excellencies, Mr. Pan Mong, the President of the Socialist Party of Vietnam. Indonesia, and he will be joining us through online. Let's invite the Director General, Mr. Cambodia. We have Mr. Signature Tonga, President of Chance, Voluntary and Stewardship, present online. And last but not least, Adjan Muhammad Satu, President of Diligence Indonesia. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, once again, welcome to Bali. I'm honored to be here to be the facilitator, but also to trigger the discussion. Allow me to just to show to you some facts and data, and we can proceed from there. What are we going to do? What are we going to achieve in this today's discussion? You think you can show me the slides, please? Okay, the slides. Okay, so I'd like to share with you some of the issues that we are going to discuss in the next 2 days. We have the opportunity and also challenges to capture fisheries in the Southeast Asia. I used to be Next. Yes, this is the facts I'd like to share with you. Number one, the Southeast Asian region is the world's largest marine island. We have around 920 species of coral reef and 75,000 Thailand and 1.4 million tons, and also Cambodia 0.2 million tons. So I think this is the fact regarding the fish productions in this region. Next. But with these facts, we have some challenges. It was mentioned earlier by the Deputy Minister Basilio, by the Chairman of FIRST, Ambassador Jayusman, also the Director Generals. There's illegal fishing, transportation of illegal goods and services, transnational crimes, and also others crime activities in this region. So I think the first task that we have to work together, I think, in this region, we should jointly tackle these challenges by implementing various agreed international regional laws and regulations. I was trying to find some list of law and regulation, both global and also regional, in which our countries already ratified. Next, for examples. Next. Next, please. Okay, this is some of the regulation and law that has been ratified by Southeast Asian countries. Of course, UNCLOS 1982. Some of those, most of them already. I know Cambodia is moving toward ratifying the UNCLOS. There's the ASEAN Charter, of course, in 1967. There's a zone of peace in this area. We have to work together, mostly economically. There's a UN Convention against transnational organized crime. And I think for fisheries management related to code of conduct of responsible fisheries, we have the FAO 1995, among others, to combat illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing practices, and also port state measures agreement to combat overfishing in 2009. I think now is around 74 countries already ratified this agreement. And last but not least, we should work together to regional fisheries management organization. There's IUTC, Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, CCSBT, Commission for Conservation South Bluefin Tuna, also WCPFC, West Transcendental Pacific Fisheries Commission. Law and regulations are already ratified by many of our countries here. So we have some facts, we have some law and regulation that we are already together. So next is my last slide, of course. Next. So I think we should jointly implement these various international regional law and regulations, joint maritime exercises, joint maritime the petrol, and as finish our border agreement. I think now I think most of countries in this region already finished their border agreements between countries. Hopefully with Malaysia, Indonesia will finish the border agreements in the Malacca Strait. So those are the issues I like to share with you and to trigger the discussion. Actually, we have already some modality to proceed. Now, hopefully that it was mentioned by the chairman of the FIRST. Let's bring some recommendation that we can present in the upcoming G20 meeting. So, in that issues, again, I would like to invite the speakers for this event. First, Excellency Mr. Tan Van Tong, Ambassador of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam in Indonesia. I think the ambassador would like to make presentation offline. Ambassador, time is yours. Mr. Ambassador. Oh. Pak Basilo katanya belakangan kan ya? Betul. Dia bilangnya begitu tuh. Okay, so I think while waiting for the Excellency Ambassador, I would like to invite Mr. Ing Trai, Deputy Director General, Fisheries Administration, Minister of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, the Kingdom of Cambodia. Mr. Trai, time is yours.
This forum and Cambodia look forward to agree the solution of the problem facing sustainable fishery. On behalf of the Fishery Administration and of the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery of Kingdom of Cambodia, it is my pleasure to make an intervention on this significant and remarkable event hosted by the government of Indonesia. Cambodia has made a great progress toward the end of the IUU fishing, making life better for those involved in fishery and the sustainable use of the fishery resources. In this regard, I would like to highlight the key progress point as below. The first, legal framework. Cambodia has included IUU fishing issue as well as the inland and marine fishery management and habitat conservation into the law on fishery in the year 2006. The national fishery policy and the strategic planning framework for fishery comprises the measures to support increased citizen participation in the sustainable fishery resources management and protection of the marine living resources. This policy also set up the government intention to strengthen economic and technical cooperation on the protection of the fishery resources within outside the region. With this support from the European Union, Cambodia has been developed the new fishery law and hope that it can be implemented in the earlier year 2020-23 in order to ensure the effective control of IUU fishing as well as improve fishery management via various initiatives such as controlling fishing capacity, developing post-state measures, promoting sustainable aquaculture management. This law has been developed in accordance with the principle of the good governance, providing opportunity for growth and key principles related to fishery management. In particular, this new law has broad jurisdiction on the management of the marine fishery, include high sea fishery activity. The international convention related to the IUU fishing. The royal government of Cambodia has signed accession to international instruments related to IUU fishing. The first post-state measures agreement on the 6th December 2019, and the second UN Fish Stock Agreement on the 6th March 2020. The implementation of the post-state measures agreement to combating IUU fishing. The Fishery Administration have considered the post-state measures agreement as the priority area for the action in the year 2020 and 22, and it adopt the design of the private port in Kok Kong proving as a post-state measures agreement port. The Office of Fishery Inspection Authority is in Sihanoukville. With the participation of the regional authority, officer of the Office of the Fishery Inspector will be attend the training course in inspection foreign fishing vessel in the post-state measures agreement port later this year. And the fishing port of the post-state measure will be available in late 2022 or the earlier 2023. The implementation of the United Nations Fish Stock Agreement. The Fishery Administration continue to cooperate with the local organizations such as SEADEC for the information on the fishery, especially with regard the highly migratory and the share fish stock in the Gulf of Thailand. The Fishery Administration also collaborate with the ASEAN on a matter of the mature policy interests such as controlling illegal fishing. The strategic planning framework for fishery. In addition, the strategic planning framework for fishery is the strategic policy document highlighting the ecosystem approach to the fishery management. At the same time, Cambodia is also applied the code of conduct for responsible fishery and the voluntary guideline for the small-scale fishery, which reflect extensive to ecosystem approach to the fishery management. The strategic and action plan related to the IUU fishing. Cambodia also just adopted two national plans that are related to implementing action to address IUU fishing. The first, the national plan for control the inspection of marine fishery 2020 to 2024 were adopted in May 2020 by the Minister of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery. The National Plan of Action on IUU Fishing were adopted on the 28 July 2020 by the Prime Minister and include a roadmap to develop the Marine Fishery Management Plan. The implementation of the Marine Fishery Management Plan. Cambodian marine fishery are increasingly important for commerce and the livelihood. And royal government has taken several steps to put them on the highway to sustainability. The Fishery Administration is currently prepare a marine fishery management plan with supporting from the FAO, which is expected complete before the end of this year. The plan will be based on the ecosystem approach to the fishery and covers catch control, habitat protection, and good governance. Include the involvement of those involved the fishery, the community fishery, proving the human rights violation in the fishery sector. Cambodia is the party to a core human rights treaty and protocol that have added obligation to the government. The measures that the royal government of Cambodia must exercise this right for benefit of Cambodian citizens as stated in Article 31 of the Cambodia Constitution. In the year 2007, the Constitutional Council of the Kingdom of Cambodia issued clearly resolution stating that the human rights treaty that Cambodia have ratified as part of Cambodia domestic law and should be implemented by judges in the court. In addition, the royal government of Cambodia protect the human and protect the fishermen and the migrant worker working in the fishery sector abroad by issue the policy focus on the protecting their right and intend and cooperate with the authority authority of the country concerned. Recommendation. Moving toward sustainable fishery is a fundamental to tackle issues such as overfishing, illegal fishing, excess fishing capacity, misconduct for the fishermen, etc. The root of this problem is the regional overcapacity in the fishery. Individual countries need to adjust their local fishery capacity to ensure both the economic variability, flat, and the sustainable use of the fishery resources while conserving ecosystem. Ensure that the stock are maintained or restored to the maximum sustainable yield as set out in UNCLOS with benefit to the people and environment and all the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ing Trai. The next speaker will be Mr. Brian Dexter Lau. He's the Deputy Chief of Mission, Embassy of the Republic of the Philippines. He will be presenting his speech online. Excellency, Mr. Lau, time is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Sausillo. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished participants, friends. On behalf of the Philippine Embassy in Jakarta, I wish you a pleasant morning. I would like to express my appreciation to the organizers for extending an invitation to the Republic of the Philippines, providing us an opportunity to share some important developments that deal with sustainable capture fisheries. As we only have limited time, allow me to begin by highlighting that the Philippines supports an ecosystem-based approach in fisheries management. The continuous increase in demand for fish products at the global level highlights the important role that fisheries management plays in fish production to supply consumers as well as to support the livelihood of rural communities. Since 2017, the Philippines, through our Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, have issued 15 high-priority implementing regulations to fully execute the provisions of the amended Philippine Fisheries Code. Examples of these regulations are the issuances establishing fisheries management areas in Philippine waters in 2018, vessel monitoring measures and electronic reporting systems for commercial Philippine flagged vessels in 2020, and rules governing landing and transshipping of fish and fishery products by foreign flagged vessels in 2021. The Philippines has also developed management plans for tuna, sardines, blue swimming crab, and octopus to serve as the frameworks for the conservation, protection, and sustainability of these fishery commodities. Friends, principles of sustainability are the cornerstone of the Philippines' approach to fisheries. And as a responsible member of the international community, the Philippines acceded to and pledged to realize the objectives of relevant multilateral agreements to address illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, such as the Port State Measures Agreement of the Food and Agriculture Organization, the Agreement to promote compliance with international conservation and management measures by fishing vessels on the high seas, and the Agreement on UNCLOS provisions relating to the conservation and management of straddling fish stocks, including migratory fish. We recognize that IUU fishing undermines national and regional efforts to manage fisheries in a sustainable manner and threatens food security and the source of livelihood for our coastal communities. We are guided by responsive legislation and strategic interventions to combat IUU fishing. The Philippines has in fact implemented a national plan of action to achieve the objectives of the UNFAO's International Plan of Action on IUU fishing. In addition, the Philippine Comprehensive National Fisheries Industry Development Plan provides strategic directions for Philippine fisheries towards a sustainable and competitive fisheries industry. Aside from IUU fishing, marine pollution is another major threat to sustainable development. The Philippines sees the global problem of marine litter and plastic pollution as a multidisciplinary challenge that requires a comprehensive approach towards a solution. Marine pollution's impact on water and food supplies, public health, and industries such as shipping and tourism, all of which affects sustainable fishing, is a shared problem that requires shared solutions. To address this, the Philippines adopted in 2021 a National Plan of Action for the Prevention, Reduction, and Management of Marine Litter, or NPOA-ML. As a regional neighbor, the Philippines adopted the Regional Action Plan for Combating Marine Debris in ASEAN member states 2021 to 2025. Globally, the Philippines supports adoption of an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. Excellencies, as I approach the concluding portion of my remarks, I wish to mention that in the Philippines, necessary mechanisms are already in place. We have relevant local legislation on IUU fishing. We also have appropriate government agency directives regulating work conditions of fishers aboard commercial fishing vessels. Inevitably, however, challenges arise in its implementation, related to budgetary constraints, for example, or in the need to have a more vigorous information campaign for stakeholder engagement and awareness about relevant or revised regulations. Also, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to the postponement of consultations and implementation of some government directives. Be that as it may, the Philippines believes that collective undertaking must continue as it strives to support the Regional Plan of Action against IUU fishing and the continued application of science for the conservation of living marine resources. When we protect the oceans against IUU fishing, we protect the ecological balance not just within our seas, but also of the waters of our neighboring countries. Thus, bilateral and multilateral engagements must continue to prevent IUU fishing. Toward this end, the Philippines seeks to promote bilateral, sub-regional, regional, and international cooperation on biodiversity research and exchanges of information and expertise, as well as interagency collaboration, including cooperation between law enforcement agencies with respect to vessels suspected on reasonable grounds to have engaged in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my brief overview of developments in the Philippines. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Brian Lau, for your kind presentation. Next speaker, I would like to invite Mr. Basilio Arajo, the Deputy Minister of the Coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs and Investment. Mr. Basilio, time is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Indrono Susilo, all respected speakers and distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me start by calling everyone's thoughts on a very important statement about the seafood chain. The first is from FIO. FIO estimates that around 60 million people are employed worldwide in the fishing sector. And fish farming is about 20.5 million people. The livelihoods of some 660 to 880 million people depend on the fishing sector. Most are in developing countries and are small-scale artisanal fisheries and fish farmers. Global fish production is estimated to have reached about 178 million tons per year, with a total fish sale value estimated at $401 billion, of which 82 million tons, valued at $250 billion, come from aquaculture production. 166 million tons were used for human consumption, equivalent to an estimated annual supply of 20.5 kilograms per capita. And it is estimated that the annual per capita consumption of fish and fish products could grow up to 25.5 kilograms by 2050. Aquaculture accounted for 46% of the total production and 52% of fish for human consumption. China has remained a major fish producer, accounting for 35% of global fish production since 2018. Excluding China, a significant share of production since 2018 is from Asia, 34%, followed by the Americas, for 14%, Europe, 10%, Africa, 7%, and Oceania, 1%. Fish and seafood is one of the most traded food commodities and the most widely consumed foods in the world, and it is only becoming more popular over time. Matched with all the big figures, the United Nations has dedicated the year to 2022 to sustainable fishing and aquaculture. By declaring 2022 a special year for fishing, fish farming and aquaculture, the UN wants to show the importance of sustainably using the oceans for our future. Food security has consistently been recognized in the global fora as one of the world's main challenges, of course with a safe, sustainable supply of fish products. Since 1950s, the global fisheries and aquaculture productions has increased by 820%. In 2019, 92.5 million tons of fish from capture fisheries and 85.3 million tons of fish from aquaculture were produced. And 40% of capture fisheries production is from small-scale fisheries. 90% of all employed in capture fisheries value chains are in small-scale fisheries. The country that catches the highest value of fish is China, followed by Indonesia and India. And for all global population expected to reach nearly 10 billion by 2050, it is a crucial component of this big challenge. Unfortunately, the rapid growth has been accomplished in several parts of the world in an unsustainable way, mainly overfishing practices, harmful fish subsidies, pollution, the impact of climate change, and the main reasons are illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. All these results in an estimated economic loss of 83 billion per year for fisheries, and over 6 billion per year from IU fishing and diseases in aquaculture. Without unsustainable fishing, we cannot guarantee food for the future in and for developing countries and in our region. Imagine one day when land can no more provide food. Where else should we go if there is no more fish at sea? In the context of fisheries, I have to say, fisheries are one of the largest and oldest primary industries in the world, providing an estimated 59.6 million people with jobs globally. But inside the fisheries industry is notorious for severe decent work deficits, close related to the abuse of forced labor and child labor, and linked to human traffickers, people smugglers, and environmental violations. The International Labour Organization stated that the fact that work in fishing is dirty, dangerous, and difficult, or 3D job. These circumstances leads us to undesirable labor shortages and recruitment difficulties. Even in Indonesia today, I went to several ports. I asked the fishermen how many times they go on board. Most of the answer is only once. So they never go for the second time. Of course, these pose us question, why? Why they only want to go on board once and never again for their life? The ILO has also estimated that nearly 21 million people are trapped in forced labor, work into which they were coerced or deceived, as I explained before. And they cannot live freely without the risk of punishment or sanctions. I think we have seen so many videos on the internet on these practices. The fisheries industry and ensuring the sustainability of the global seafood estate is complex and really challenging, but not complicated. There is a need to formulate comprehensive and responsible policies and environmental-based practices in the fishery sector, from fish to dish. What type of policies and practices are we talking about? Developing countries have increased their share of international fish trade up from 38% to 54% of global export value, and from 34% to 60% of total values between 1976 and 2018. The EU is the largest fish importing market, 34% in terms of value, followed by the United States of America, 14%, and Japan, 9%. The global market for seafood was estimated to be valued at 113.2 billion US dollars in 2020. I once was asked to speak at IMO, and the only question that I posed at that time is that, do we still want to eat our seafood menu at the tears of these people? And the forum was really quiet when I said it. The growth rate of the global market for seafood is 2.9%, with an estimated value of 138.7 billion by 2027, and estimated to be worth 138.7 billion US dollars by 2027. In the global tuna segment, USA, Canada, Japan, China, and Europe will drive the 2.7% compound annual growth rate estimated for this segment. These regional markets, accounting for a combined market size of 7.9 billion US dollars in the year 2020, reach a projected size of US 0.5 billion US dollars. China remains among the fastest growing in this cluster of regional markets, led by countries such as Australia, India, and South Korea. The market in Asia Pacific is forecast to reach 41.2 billion US dollars by the year 2027, while Latin America will expand at 2.4 CAGR. Does fisheries contribute to the food security of millions of people? And fish are the predominant protein sources in developing countries. While overfishing remains persistent, with 33% of stocks currently overfished and 40% fished to their maximum limit, the threatened economic and social stability of fisheries is further weakened by the prevalence of practices of illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. So IUU fishing is a major contributor to global overfishing, threatening food security, maritime livelihood, and fisheries sustainability. IUU fishing is widespread, comprising an estimated 20% of global fish catch, with annual economic losses estimated between 26 to 50 billion US dollars. It is a huge problem not only for the 59.5 million people who depend on fisheries for their livelihoods, but also for the environment. We must react and counter illegal fishing by collaborative action and integrated policy. Not only IUU fishing is associated to transnational crimes, involving organized criminals operating vessels on the high seas, even smuggling drugs, weapons, and people. If we dive deeper, this is very important, given that the fisheries industry is an imperative economic sector from food security and employment perspective. I believe that the introduction of effective fish management systems, banning harmful fishing practices and subsidies, effective traceability systems, zero food waste and circular production processes, strict hazardous controls and sanitary measures, and awareness by consumers can provide significant contributions. Policies can facilitate the transition to sustainable ocean-based economies by increasing resources efficiency, improving the environment, enhancing inclusiveness, and creating new green business opportunities. And policies can also be an enabler of sustainable practices along the seafood value chain. However, government's commitment will be crucial to realize these concerted efforts. In line with Indonesia as the president of G20 this year, we could provide a platform to discuss what actions and new partnerships are required in order to safeguard our oceans and maximize the benefits of sustainable fish trade for all. In this respective forum, I think we should discuss more substantive issues in sustainable fisheries with regard to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the Paris Agreement, reports on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and related documents on Conference of the Parties 26 and technology transfer. We have to recognize the knowledge and technology gap and improve fisheries operations by operations legally and sustainably to alleviate poverty and create decent livelihoods, for better social well-being, to sustainability of the global supply chain, seafood industry, and for the sake of food security. And finally, one way to combat IU fishing is by ratifying international binding agreements or instruments. And some to mention is FAO Post-State Measures Agreements 2009, ILO C-188 Work in Fishing Convention 2007, and of course IMO Cape Town Agreement on Safety of Fishing Vessels. I think these four instruments are the very most important four pillar instruments to combat IU fishing if we are really serious in combating this issue. By this, I will end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Master Basilio, and for the kind presentation. Now the next speaker will be Excellency Ambassador Tan Van Tong, the Vietnamese ambassador to Indonesia. Excellency Ambassador Van Tong, please, time is yours.
Thank you very much, Minister Susilo. And good morning to participants and the representative of the Marine Affairs and Fisheries, the Republic of Indonesia, and Mr. Marzuki Darusman, the Chair Foundation for International Human Rights and Development Standards, Excellencies, ambassadors, and representatives from the diplomatic corps and international organizations, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. And at the outset, I would like to thank the coordinating Ministry of Maritime and Industrial Affairs and the Foundation for International Human Rights Reporting Standards hosting the 2 days forum on the theme of the current state of sustainable fisheries in Southeast Asia region. And so I'd like to join my fellow ASEAN ambassadors and the Deputy Minister Coordination of Maritime Sovereignty and Energy, and the Coordinating Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Investment in Indonesia, to share experiences and good practices on the fisheries sectors towards the common goal in enhancing the competitiveness and sustainability of the regional fishing industry. Distinguished colleagues, dear friends, and I share the observations and recommendations made by the fellow panelists and colleagues from Indonesia, the Philippines, Cambodia, and others. For Vietnam, we have the coastal line of more than 3,000 kilometers long in the South China Sea. And Vietnam has also an ocean area with the high level biodiversity, dense river systems, and long coastal line. This is very conducive to the agricultural development in our country. And first, the fishery is a key economic sector, and it has been on the forefront of the international economic integration efforts for decades in our economy. And the fishery sector is also directly responsible for the livelihoods of more than 1 million fishermen and 4 million others operated in Vietnam. And however, the natural fishery resources are also being depleted due to legal, unreported, and unregulated fishing activities. As such, Vietnam attaches great importance to combating the IUU fishing and promoting sustainable fishery development. And along that line, the Vietnamese government has established a National Steering Committee on IUU fishing, and that committee is comprised of the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development as a lead agency, and other relevant agencies of the government, and 28 coastal provinces and cities to prevent and combat IUU fishing. And now I'd like to highlight the 5 key areas that we have done to combat IUU fishing. First, Vietnam has established the domestic legal framework that includes the new law on the fisheries, and the 2 government decrees, and 8 circulars, and 1 Prime Minister decision. And this legal framework is fully compatible with the international law. For instance, the responsibilities of Vietnam as a flag state, coastal state, and a port state. And this is the legal framework for Vietnam to combat IUU fishing and build sustainable fishery sector. And the government of Vietnam will not stop there, and we will continue to improve the legal framework for this proposal. Second, Vietnam has also adopted a new approach to make sure that preventing and combating IUU fishing is in tandem with sustainable and responsible fisheries development. And this new approach has been incorporated in the Vietnam Fisheries Development Strategy until 2030 and 2050, and in the National Program on Sustainable Fisheries Development, and the plan to combat IUU fishing until 2025. Third, Vietnam has also made substantive progress in combating and preventing fishing on the ground. And we have installed the vessel monitoring system on more than 92% of the fishing vessels that are more than 15 meters long. And 100% 50% of the seafood products at the designated ports can be verified as legal catches. And law enforcement has been also substantially strengthened, especially in preventing the fishing operations in foreign waters or violation of the monetary requirements of our fishing vessels. And the Vietnamese government also has built a streamlined database for fishing vessels to carry out the registrations and permits. And fourth, Vietnam has enhanced international cooperation with regional partners through different measures, such as the setting up of hotlines to combat the IUU. And Vietnam also has actively contributed to efforts to establish a roadmap for combating IUU in ASEAN as well as other regional and international frameworks. And fifth, for ensuring the human rights of workers in the fishery sector, the employers must abide by Vietnamese laws, including the Constitution, the Labor Code, and the law on children. On the other hand, Vietnam has also ratified 20 international labor ILO conventions and 7 of 8 fundamental conventions, including those on forced labor, rights recognized and collective bargaining, and the worst forms of child labor. And 2019, the National Assembly of Vietnam passed the amended the law, the labor code, with the provisions aimed at better ensuring labor rights in accordance with the international forms and norms and standards. And in addition to that, the Vietnamese government also recognizes the challenges facing us in combating the IUU fishing. Although the number of Vietnamese fishing vessels infringing upon water has decreased significantly over the years, this number is still a cause of concern. The law enforcement is also still remain the outstanding issue, as it varies from province to province, and in the many provinces and cities.
I think we have an internet problem. Okay, Excellencies, I think because the time is up, so I may, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much for all the speakers for this first session, and thank you for the input and the presentations. And I would like to stop the discussion today, right now, of this session. And once again, thank you very much. I'll put it back the time to the committee. And good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Prof. Indroyono, and all the speakers for the insightful session. Before moving on to the next session, we will have a 5-minute coffee break. We hope you will remain in the room as the waiters will come to your table. Thank you.
Recording in progress. Recording in progress. Recording in progress.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the coffee break. Now, we will continue with the second session, a panel discussion on human rights due diligence, a new normal in ensuring sustainable fisheries and preventing human rights abuses in the fisheries industry. This panel discussion will be moderated by Pak Bahtiar Manurung, the Operations Director of FIRST. I now invite the moderator and all speakers to come to the podium.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will continue with the next panel discussion today. My name is Bahtiar Manurung and I am the Operations Director of FIRST. I'm so excited about this panel discussion because we have 5 wonderful speakers for this session, 3 joining us in person here in Bali and 2 joining us virtually. Joining us in person, we have Anita to my right. She's joining us all the way from New York. So thank you, Anita, for joining us. And second to my right, we have Ambassador Dery Aman. Terima kasih, Pak, for joining us. And then third to my right, we have Dr. Pham Quang Min from ASEAN Secretariat. Thank you, Pak, for joining us. And we have Minister Masato Usui from Japan Embassy joining us virtually. Thank you for joining us, Pak Masato. And we also have Kevin Lehman from UNDP Asia Pacific joining us virtually. Thank you for being with us here virtually, Kevin. So before we dive really into the discussion, let me give you a brief overview of this session topic. So in the last decade, there has been an increasing demand on for responsible, sustainable business, for responsible and sustainable business practices from consumers, investors, and governments worldwide. For example, consumers in fisheries importing countries like United Kingdom, Denmark are willing to pay premium price for sustainable certified products. In the United States, 58% of consumers believe that seafood consumption should only come from sustainable sources to save the ocean. And then following the shift from consumers' demand, there is a growing number of investors that are considering environmental, social, and governance aspect in their investment activities. Investors that invest in companies with strong ESG performance have skyrocketed in recent years. It reached $35 trillion in 2020 and is expected to rise. Governments have also called on companies to engage in sustainable and responsible business practices. Countries like France, Germany, and the Netherlands have adopted legislation on human rights due diligence. And early this year, European Union published its proposed directive on corporate human rights and environmental due diligence. And in addition to that, Japan, one of the largest importing countries of Southeast Asia's fisheries product, has recently announced that it will develop human rights due diligence guidelines to help companies to prevent human rights violation in their supply chains. Our panel today will discuss this growing trend on human rights due diligence and its role in sustainable fisheries, and preventing human rights abuse in the fishery industry, and how ASEAN address this trend. We are very fortunate because we have a wonderful and diverse group of speakers representing business and human rights practitioners, the investor community, fisheries importing countries, and ASEAN member countries. We will first listen to the remarks from each speaker, who will be speaking in maximum 8 minutes, and then we will continue with question and answer at the end of the session. So without saying more, let me now turn to our first panelist. Our first panelist is Kevin Lehman, who is joining us virtually. Let us see if we can see Kevin on the screen. Kevin is Business and Human Rights Analyst at UNDP Asia Pacific. UNDP has helped countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam in adopting business and human rights in the last few years. And just this year, UNDP announced that they will extend their project into 17 countries. So with that, Kevin, I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Bastiar. First of all, I would like to thank the Indonesian government, the Coordinating Ministry for Maritime and Investment Affairs, and first for the invitation to join these important discussions today. As has already been highlighted by some speakers today, the issue of business respect for human rights has been the subject of fast-paced developments since the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the UNGPs, were adopted in 2011. The UNGPs have introduced the concept of human rights due diligence, which is a process through which businesses can know and show that they respect human rights. As other speakers highlighted this morning, various human rights issues can be associated, potentially associated with the fisheries industry, including forced and bonded labor, human trafficking, and broader labor rights issues, as well as issues regarding a healthy environment, biodiversity, and ensuring livelihoods. Now, due to a number of legislative initiatives across the world, multinational corporations are starting to conduct human rights due diligence. And developments related to HRDD, human rights due diligence, and other legislative initiatives can have a significant impact on Southeast Asian economies and companies. So I would like to share a few of these legislative developments with you before discussing implications for Southeast Asian governments and businesses. So a development which has mainly taken place in Europe is the development and adoption of so-called mandatory human rights due diligence legislation. Now, HRDD legislation requires companies to identify, prevent, mitigate, and remediate business-related human rights abuses. A few countries that have already adopted such legislation include France, Germany, Norway, the Netherlands, and to an extent Switzerland. And many other countries in Europe and elsewhere are developing such legislation as well. Most notably, as Bastiar just mentioned, the European Commission has published a proposal for a corporate sustainability due diligence legislation, or directive, I must say. If adopted, the directive would create obligations for large companies based in the EU to conduct human rights due diligence and ensure that they identify and address human rights issues in their own activities as well as those in their supply chains. Now, you might wonder how will this impact on companies in Southeast Asia, considering that many of these legislations that I just mentioned are being developed in Europe and potentially elsewhere. Well, companies subject to HRDD obligations, for example, European companies, they will have to do the following. They will have to identify actual and potential human rights impacts, right? So impacts that have already occurred and that might potentially occur in the future. Once they identify risks, they need to make an assessment of which these risks are the most severe, and then the most severe impacts should be prioritized and addressed first. And after that step, companies will need to prevent and mitigate all these human rights impacts, and also provide remedy if impacts have occurred, for example, through compensation. Now, it might be possible that a multinational corporation sourcing seafood products from Southeast Asian countries concludes that forced labor in its supply chains are a severe human rights risk. Then that company will expect, for example, of its Southeast Asian suppliers that they provide information on how they deal with these human rights risks. For example, a multinational corporation could require its Southeast Asian suppliers to have systems in place to identify human rights issues, have systems in place to prevent, mitigate, and remediate human rights issues in their own operations, but also relating to their suppliers, and would require Southeast Asian companies to exercise leverage over their own upstream supply chain if they have one. Now, you might also wonder what happens if companies in the Southeast Asian fishery sector do not implement these measures. So one risk that we see is that multinational corporations who are subject to these obligations, they might decide to end the business relationship with a supplier that does not have these systems in place, right? These systems to know and show that it respects human rights. And perhaps the multinational corporation will turn to another supplier in the region to source its seafood. But it's also possible that a significant number of corporations decide to source from other countries or regions entirely. Now this is of course a risk to economies in general, so governments might need to consider how to stay part of global supply chains and respond to these business and human rights trends. And I did mention human rights due diligence legislation, but there are also some other relevant laws that I would like to highlight briefly that are very important in this context. Now, for example, in the past few years, the United States of America has increasingly banned the import of products which were suspected to be supplied with the use of forced labor. Now, we have seen several instances of the U.S. banning imports of these products coming from Southeast Asian countries. So this is not a hypothetical issue. And other countries and blocs are considering such measures too, including the European Union, as was announced recently. So the implications are quite severe. It means that companies might lose valuable markets. And just as another example, there's also the UK and Australian Modern Slavery Act, which require UK and Australia-based companies to report on how they deal with issues of modern slavery. And again, this will have implications for Southeast Asian countries and companies. Now, there is, of course, a couple of things Southeast Asian companies can do to prepare for these developments. For example, Southeast Asian companies can ensure that they respect human rights in their own activities. So let us say you're a fishing company. You should seek to ensure that you do not use forced labor and that you provide your workers with decent working conditions, for example. But of course, many more human rights issues could be relevant. And second of all, companies can ensure that their supply chain partners also respect human rights, because this is what the multinational corporations will be requiring of you, right? They will not only require you to respect rights within your operations, but also within your supply chain. And what can companies do? Well, they can use their economic leverage over their suppliers to ensure they respect human rights. So let us take an example. Say you're a company that trades in seafood products, but you do not fish yourself. So what you can do is you can make your suppliers, the fishing companies, aware of how they can respect rights. You can build their capacity to do so, and perhaps you can provide financial or other incentives for them to improve their human rights performance. And this includes, so this is what companies can do for their supply chain. And just as a last point, I would like to highlight that governments, of course, also have a key role to play. So first of all, they can provide guidance to companies on how to conduct human rights due diligence and respect human rights. And as Bhattiyar mentioned just now, for example, the government of Japan recently announced an expectation for upcoming guidelines on human rights due diligence to help Japanese companies and their suppliers to understand how they should conduct human rights due diligence. And governments can also, of course, pass their own human rights due diligence legislation. So, for example, what we see in Thailand, the Thai Securities and Exchange Commission has committed to establishing mandatory reporting requirements on HRDD for Thai companies, and this might be a first step towards HRDD obligations in Asia. So, to recap, what are the benefits for Southeast Asian companies? in conducting human rights due diligence? Well, there might be a business case. For example, European companies subject to HRDD obligations might cut off suppliers who do not respect human rights. So Southeast Asian companies might lose valuable business opportunities. On the other hand, if a Southeast Asian company shows that it has good human rights performance, it might gain new business opportunities. And of course, the same applies to import bans. If a company fails to prevent forced labor, they might not be able to sell their products in certain markets anymore. And finally, considering the increased attention for business-related human rights abuses, companies might face reputational, legal, and financial risks. So addressing human rights issues can really help a company to become more resilient to all sorts of shocks and risks. And all of this, of course, has implications for governments, right? By providing guidance to companies or even requiring them to respect human rights and conduct human rights due diligence, governments can ensure that their economies remain competitive and remain their place in the global supply chains. Now, UNDP, with the support of the European Union, has developed a training guide on human rights due diligence for companies. I will post a link in the chat. And with support, also one final thing I wanted to highlight is with support of the government of Japan, UNDP is setting up a Business and Human Rights Academy in Asia to train companies on human rights due diligence. And please reach out to UNDP if you would like more information on this. So with that, I would like to conclude my remarks. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for guiding us through the global landscape of human rights due diligence, legislation, and standards, and also explain to us the impacts on Southeast Asia business if they don't follow this new trend, and also the benefit of carrying out human rights for companies in general, and also companies in fisheries industry. With that, I will now talk to our second speaker, Anita Doret. Anita is the Program Director for the Investor Alliance for Human Rights. Investor Alliance for Human Rights is a responsible investment platform that focuses on the investor's responsibility to respect human rights and corporate engagement that drive responsible business conduct. Currently, Investor Alliance members represent over $10 trillion in asset under management in 19 countries. Anita is going to explain to us the point of view of investor on the growing responsible business conduct and also respect for human rights. Anita.
Great, thanks for that, Dr. And for that great introduction. And also wanted to thank the organizers, Indonesia's Coordinating Minister of Maritime and Investment Affairs, and for first, to really inviting us here to be able to speak and to tell you more about the perspective of investors. Really honored to be able to participate and speak with all these distinguished participants today. Just picking up from what Bahadur mentioned in his introduction, where he talked about the fact that investors are already he mentioned the term focused 35 trillion of their investment dollars into sustainable investments or ESG related investments. The fact is that investors as financial actors have an important role to play in enabling economic and societal well-being, and we are seeing that exponential growth in ESG, environmental, social, and governance-based investing. So ESG is really upending the world of financing and investing as it moves from the periphery to really the more mainstream. And we're expecting to see this reach 41 trillion by the end of 2022. I did have a set of slides, so I'm not sure whether, yeah, no, that's great. John just now Yes, okay, this is great. I mean, Bhatir already spoke a little bit about the Investor Alliance, and I just wanted to sort of clarify that, or wanted to just elaborate more. We're a non-profit organization, and we're a human rights advocacy organization, and our focus is to work with investors, recognizing when my colleague James just now, is it James or John who spoke just now from the UNDP? Kevin, excuse me. Sorry, my bad. Just picking up from what Kevin was talking about, the corporate responsibility to respect human rights. Investors are a corporation, and so they need to respect human rights as well. And so we're really trying to pull together that investor responsibility to respect human rights, the corporate engagement to drive for responsible business conduct, and also engaging with government and standard-setting bodies to enable robust human rights enabling environments that allow for responsible business. So can we go to the next slide, please? And this was already what Kevin mentioned as well, that there are 3 pillars to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. The 3 pillars being the state duty to protect against human rights abuses, the corporate responsibility to respect human rights in their business operations. And when we talk about business operations, you're not just looking at the company itself, you're looking at the company across its whole value chain. So the idea of looking at your customers as well as your suppliers. And so when we assess your human rights responsibilities or performance, we're not just looking at the company alone, but the whole, the whole ecosystem attached to it. And then the 3rd pillar, which is access to remedy, to ensure that those who have been wronged or have suffered as a result of such business operations and human rights violations have a route to remedy. And so with that, this slide really talks about the fact that I mentioned before that investors are corporations and they have that corporate responsibility to respect human rights. It's not something that we're calling on to people, but we're really working with investors to recognize that they themselves have that responsibility. And with that responsibility comes that responsibility to also conduct human rights due diligence.
ทำอะไรมีประสานกับกปต. ประสานกปต.
So investors, so when we talk about investors, we're talking about asset owners like employee pension funds. We're talking about asset managers who manage these funds, the BlackRocks of this world, ABN AMRO, Citibank. They're managing our monies, right? But these monies really enable fishery industry to move forward through investments. And so investors, when they are looking to invest their money, of course, they're looking at financial gain. But really now there has been a change. We're not looking at just pure financial gain, but really ensuring that any gain is not at the cost to people and planet. We are really looking for long-term gains, value creation for sustainable business and economies that support the people it serves for generations to come. So that's why we're always talking about sustainability and resilience. Hence, investors are not just looking at financial risks, but they're also looking at non-financial risks, which I referred to earlier as the ESG risks, environmental, social, and governance risks. And investors are taking those risks into account to inform their investment decisions. So they want to invest their dollars in sustainable investments, in sustainable businesses, in businesses that respect human rights, and ensuring that it's not just financial gain and profitability. So the profile received by ESG today that is being demanded by investors is happening for a good reason. The physical impacts of climate change are becoming more apparent with each coming season. The global pandemic has forced a renewed examination of our global workforce across company value chains. The decline of democracy as well has significantly increased legal, operational, and reputational risks for companies. So in that context, investors recognize the material significance of ESG to enterprise value creation. And when we talk about human rights and respect for human rights, it's not just an ESG factor. It's not just one factor within the S or part of the subset of the S, but it's an international standard that really, and framework that really applies across all E, S, and G factors. So when you look at this slide here, I mean, I was just kind of trying to call out the fact that when we looked at the investment community, we're looking at the investor community as they need to operate under various international frameworks and regional frameworks to achieve sustainable development goals that we've talked about earlier. The EU directive that Kevin spoke about as well. In the US, we're looking at tariff bans or forced labor bans and trade bans. And in fact, I wanted to quote from Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock, the largest asset managing firm in the world, where he basically said that companies that fail to effectively manage potential and actual adverse human rights issues can only harm the people directly affected. Can not only harm the people directly affected, but also expose companies to significant legal, regulatory, operational, and reputational risks for business partners, customers, and communities. So that's really sort of taking it forward. So can I just move to the next slide, please? So here I'm just trying to call out that when investors are looking to make these investments, how do they assess companies? How do they engage with companies on human rights issues? So we really want to hold businesses accountable for their business relationships throughout their value chains. And in the fisheries industry, it's primarily the supply chain. So investors really are looking at data to see how companies are performing. And as time has gone by, we see that investors are relying more and more on benchmark data on human rights performances, and those indicators are based on the UNGPs. So I've listed out a couple of benchmarks that investors are using now more and more, and that we want to see companies start to really embrace in their own human rights due diligence processes to understand that this is what investors are assessing them on. So there's the corporate human rights benchmark, and in the corporate human rights benchmark, there are a number of indicators, but there are 5 indicators that are focused on human rights due diligence. And out of 230 companies that the corporate human rights benchmark assess, 105 of them scored 0 on all 5 human rights due diligence indicators. So we really have a long way to go. So what are investors doing? They're actually engaging with those 105 companies. They're saying to them, look, we think this is important, and if this continues, we need to take certain actions to address the fact that you're not considering this as an important indication for long-term value creation. Another benchmark or data that is used and more relevant to the seafood or the fisheries industry is the Seafood Stewardship Index. And there are various indicators looking at human and labor rights in the seafood industry. Know the Chain is another benchmark that focuses on forced labor in global supply chains, and they do an indicator that relates to food and beverage companies that really trace down then through their supply chain through to seafood companies. And I wanted to just highlight that the seafood sector is globally recognized as a high-risk sector for human and labor rights, and hence this data is very important in order to be able to assess really what are the working conditions on board fishing vessels, what is the health and safety of workers, especially for fishers on distant water fishing fleets, and these are important things that investors will take into account when they decide where to put their investment dollars. And I just wanted to highlight here that as well, when investors assess companies, they also look at what steps are states taking to protect the human rights. So if they're looking at an Indonesian company or a Thai company, for example, they're also looking at what states have done. And so examples of, states taking steps to, for example, ratify the ILO work in fishing convention that, earlier Bob Marzuki mentioned, or to have national action plans that, clearly address these issues. So I'm just going to hit to the next slide. And I don't think I really need to run through this. I think this is what Kevin already ran through. But I think what I wanted to sort of highlight in this is that I've represented this as a cycle. It's not a one-off event. This is something that's continuous. All companies must conduct human rights due diligence continuously. And in the next slide, I gave some examples of how human rights due diligence really should apply to the fisheries industry. This is, I think Kevin spoke to this as well, so I'm not going to really run through it, but I wanted to just touch on the last slide on my deck, which really talks about how human rights due diligence, in a sense, applies to investors. And so what is that investor responsibility to respect human rights? How do they conduct their human rights due diligence? And they conduct their human rights due diligence by putting leverage on companies. So if you look at the slide, the first sort of bubble is about how they make their investment decisions, where they are going to put those investment dollars. So where they are, so prior to investing in a company, they will assess and communicate what their human rights expectations are. And if it does not meet those expectations, they might not invest those dollars in the first place. So if companies are really looking to get those invested dollars to grow, they need to listen to what investors want. And investors are echoing the fact of the needs for international, conforming with international principles. So that goes through to investment decision making. And when they look at investment decision making, putting those investment dollars and holding companies to account for their human rights policies and processes. And in that, then, we talk about responsible investment stewardship, where we continue to engage with companies. For example, I mentioned the 105 companies that we're engaging with to say, based on assessments, independent assessments done, you're not doing too well. We expect change. And if we don't see those changes, for example, we might vote against the board of directors at the next annual general meeting, or we might actually choose to divest from companies as well. And all this assessments that talks about really engaging with companies is really underpinned by stakeholder engagement, really speaking to affected communities, to human rights organizations, and we're really pushing for investors to not just look at things really so simply, but to really look at things more robustly and incorporate that stakeholder engagement into assessing how they invest those dollars. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anita, for sharing with us the investors' perspective on ESG and also human rights due diligence. One thing that really stands out for me from your remarks is that you said that companies that do not care about environmental, social, and governance aspect and human rights will not only affect the people, but also put risks on the companies, right? And of course, I'm also very interested in seeing the important role of investors. Investors really have a unique leverage, and because they have influence to make change of the investing companies that they invest in, including fisheries companies. With that, we will now turn to our third speaker, Minister Masato Usui, who is joining us virtually. Can we have Minister Masato on the screen?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bahatir. Distinguished panelists and distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, I feel very honored to have an opportunity to make a presentation at the seminar today. And I think when we discuss the topic of human rights and environment due diligence in the fishery sector, we are going to deal with a very conventional issue by means of a new but a promising approach. And today, I might have been asked to speak from the viewpoint of a major importing nation of fishery products. However, if we talk about the fish, specifically the HEREDD in the fishery sector in Japan, I think that it's still not very mature yet. So therefore, please allow me to speak from the viewpoint of Japanese fishery industry today, because I still think that it is relevant because half of the seafood consumed in Japan is produced domestically. And would you please show the first slide? Is it possible to show the first slide? Oh, thank you very much. My ambassador, Mr. Kanasugi, took an advantage of his home leave to visit a city in eastern North Japan called Kesenuma this month. The reason he visited Kesenuma is that there are many Indonesian people working in the fishery and seafood processing industry there. And it is said that 30% of the population of the city are Indonesians. And Ambassador Kanasigi visited the Kesenuma Fishery Cooperative Associations. He also had a discussion session with Indonesian workers in the city. And Kesenuma is one of the fisheries hub in Japan. However, because of the declining birth rate and aging population, they are facing a challenge of labor shortage. The labor shortage in the fishery industry is not a special issue only for Kesenuma, but also a common issue for port towns in Japan. Especially for more than 20 years, the Japanese tuna line fisheries on distant waters has been deeply relying on foreign crews due to the shortage of Japanese crews. Therefore, since 1998, Japan has introduced a Maru ship system. Under the system, the Japanese fishery companies first lease their fishing vessels to the foreign entities, and then these foreign entities hire for crew for the vessels. Then, at the time of operation, Japanese fishery will charter those vessels with the crews as Japanese fishing vessels. And we have 4,000 foreign Maru ships crews, while Indonesian accounts for 80% of them. Today, Indonesian crews are indispensable for Japanese distant water fisheries. Under this situation, protecting the human rights of the crews, not only domestic, but also foreign crews, is very important. 2 years ago, there was a painful news of severe human rights abuse against the Indonesian crews on fishing vessels of a third country. And I remember this vividly since it was widely reported also in the media of Japan as well. And would you turn to the second slide, please? And concerning the tuna fisheries, there is Organization of Promotion of Responsible Tuna Fisheries, OPRT, which is led by Japan and consists of tuna fishery corporations in related countries including Indonesia, Korea, China, and Taiwan. After the tragic human rights abuse cases, OPRT has made an intensive discussion and just finalized a resolution to address labor issues on board tuna longline fishing vessels, including human rights protection at the General Assembly yesterday. And in Japan, treatment for the foreign crews are based on the rules. Essentially, the labor condition of domestic Japanese crews is stipulated in the Mariners Act. Even though the foreign crews of Maru ships are not subjected to the Mariner Acts, same rules to the Act are applied to them as a result of labor management negotiations. Wages are also determined under the rules made through the labor management negotiations. Therefore, it is said that the cases of malicious human rights violation are relatively few in Japan today. I think that this was one of the reasons HREDD has not been highlighted amongst neither the Japanese industry nor consumers. And it is true that there are no case of trade disruptions due to the discovery of human rights violation of the Japanese fishery companies. And there's no best practice case also reported to the HREDD in the fishery sector too. So the HREDD in the fishery sector of Japan is yet to develop, I think. Next slide, please. However, as Mr. Bahatir introduced, the notion of the HRE itself has gradually been developed in Japan, and the Ministry of Economic and Trade Industry of Japan has established a study group on guidelines respecting human rights and supply chains this March. The draft of the guideline will come out after the summer, so I cannot predict the content, but it is said to be a cross-industry guidelines that especially aims to the small and mid-scale enterprises. And I hope that it would be a very good opportunity for further understanding the importance for HREDD for the Japanese fishery industry too. And on the consumer side, the awareness of ethical consumption is gradually growing on the fishery products too. Therefore, there are some efforts made to promote the consumption of certified fishery products in terms of environmental sustainability through initiatives such as MEL, Marine Ecolabs Japan, and MSC, Marine Stewardship Council. And this kind of an awareness is on the environment side, but I hope that this kind of awareness will expand to the human right side too. Speaking again, the awareness of the importance protection of human rights in the supply chain is developing to Japan, especially in the manufacturing industries. And now the guideline for the METI is coming up. So I hope that this kind of notion will expand into the fishery industry too. And it goes without saying that it's essential that human rights for fishery crews are guaranteed in any countries, regardless of their nationalities. It is fishery managers that must take the largest efforts to protect the human right of the crews, but distributors, consumers, and the investors on the supply chain can also play a very large role. I think that HREED must be a very good approach that can contribute the effort, combine the effort of every member of the supply chain. So accepts this notion and the practices of the HREED will develop further in my country. This is to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Masato. It's very heartening to see that the Japanese government has done a lot on responsible business conduct in the fisheries business, and even though not directly on human rights due diligence, but something that can be learned also by Southeast Asian governments, and particularly on the guidelines for HRDD that is now being developed. We're all looking forward to that, and I'm pretty sure that the countries in Southeast Asia will also be encouraged by that development and the launch of that human rights due diligence. Now that we have listened to the global expectation on human rights due diligence and responsible business conduct from business and human rights expert, also from the investor point of view, and from the importing countries, we will now move on to ASEAN. ASEAN Secretariat, ASEAN member countries, what ASEAN have done to help their businesses in anticipating or in addressing this growing trend. Our next speaker is here with us in person. His Excellency Ambassador Dery Aman. His Excellency Ambassador Dery Aman is the ambassador and permanent representative of Indonesia to ASEAN since October 2021. His Excellency working experience includes issues on international relations and cooperation in bilateral, regional, and global nature within the ASEAN mechanism, WTO, and international trade. With that, I will give the floor to His Excellency.
Thank you very much, Pak Bahtiar Manurung, as our moderator session. At the outset, let me just commend and appreciate the coordinating Ministry of Maritime and Investment Affairs and also FIRS for this very important and strategic initiative of having this forum, because as I have listened to all the presentation from this morning, this issue is very pertinent and very strategic, and as you have said, moderator, it's a global trend that we are going to face, not only globally, of course, it is going to be very relevant to our region in ASEAN. So also because this global trend also relates to the issues of human rights violations at sea and sustainable capture fisheries, and as Pa Susilo mentioned in the morning session, ASEAN member states should consider to jointly agree and implement related on human rights due diligence. My presentation is based on 3 questions that have been requested by the organizers, which are: first, any recent developments in ASEAN related to HRDD, and second, what are the impacts of the EU's or the European Union's proposed legislation on corporate sustainability due diligence directive towards ASEAN fisheries industry and other industries. And the third, what tools are available to enforce compliance with mandatory HRDD legislation. First of all, let me just emphasize from the beginning that there is no ASEAN HRDD regional mechanism yet. So therefore, this would be a challenge for ASEAN member states together with the ASEAN Secretariat to further consider on having this ASEAN HRDD regional mechanism, which of course would rely a lot to the ASEAN member states itself, because as we are all aware, ASEAN is always based on consensus. Secondly, if we talk about human rights, especially in the maritime sector in ASEAN, it would relate to different kind of bodies, since fisheries or maritime affairs, human rights is a cross-cutting pillar issue in ASEAN. So therefore, it would relate to the Ministry of Agriculture, where ASEAN has its ASEAN sectoral body on agriculture with a working group on fisheries, also to the pillar of political and security issues, which relates to human rights. And there is also the HR, which is the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission for Human Rights. So there would be a lot of tasks and challenges for ASEAN to work on this expected regional mechanism of ASEAN on HRDD. Friends and colleagues, let me just highlight that HR, the Commission on Human Rights of ASEAN, have indeed discussed this issue of HRDD, and the focus is on human rights due diligence in the fishery industry, or on combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUU fishing, from a human rights-based approach. So therefore, up to now, HR is in the stage of promoting HRDD in general to all businesses related in ASEAN. And there are certain projects in HR that have been implemented to promote this HRDD. But again, in ASEAN, everything will remain on ASEAN member states' views or consideration whether HRDD is something that they would consider as strategic and important to have a regional mechanism. And of course, we are all aware of the WTO's presence in having a voluntary guidelines on the importance of the HRDD, and also on in the ASEAN Secretariat there is a project addressing labor exploitation in fishing in ASEAN. So it's still project based, and it's part of a whole system of program for capacity building towards ASEAN member states. In 2014, if I may recall, that HR has once tabled the idea to have a regional plan of action on business and human rights. But again, since ASEAN is based on ASEAN member states consensus, this idea could not be further progress, since in ASEAN there were no consensus right now whether human rights, which is basically to promote human rights in ASEAN and also to protect human rights in ASEAN, would cover wider range of issues such as the relationship of human rights and businesses. And let me, as an Indonesian, of course, I have the obligation to also share what the government of Indonesia have been trying to put forward in relation to HRDD. We have already an innovative application called the PRISMA. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. The PRISMA. PRISMA is an innovative application made by the government of Indonesia for companies or the private sector to have risk analysis on human rights violations, of business. So it's more of a self-assessment. And this is also still on a voluntary basis. And there are other government regulations, especially from the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries, since 2015, 2016, 2017. The government of Indonesia have tried to address certain issues related to HRDD in the fisheries field. It's the government or the private sector. But as we all want to have a specific HRDD mechanism, I would say that the government of Indonesia is still working on that. And the latest in 2022, Indonesia have the regulation on the placement and protection of migrant trading vessels crew and fishing vessels crew. So this is also one progress, the latest progress for the government in Indonesia in trying to cope with the interests of our migrant workers, especially working in foreign ships. Now, the HRDD, in terms within the ASEAN mechanism, there is no agenda yet, but nationally in each ASEAN member states, I am aware that there are discussions, of course, in Indonesia and also in Thailand and Malaysia. So ASEAN consists of 10 ASEAN member states, so it's still quite a long way for ASEAN to try to raise this interest or this subject further within the ASEAN mechanism. So now I would like to go to the second question, which relates to the European Union. They have proposed a legislation on corporate sustainability due diligence directive. So this directive will apply to around 13,000 EU companies and about 4,000 non-EU companies, with the categories of EU companies with at least 500 employees and global net turnover of over 150 million euros. EU companies working in sectors at high risk of human rights abuse in agriculture, apparel, extractives, and more than 250 employees and 40 million euros in global net turnover. And most importantly and most relevant to all of us in ASEAN is for the non-EU companies with a net turnover of at least 150 million euros from their operations within the EU. So this directive, if implemented, will have implications towards non-EU companies, which with those categories, but it's clear that small and medium enterprises are not directly in the scope of this proposal. So let's see what is the impact of this proposed legislation on ASEAN. First, we should know that fisheries is an important sector within ASEAN. It contributes throughout the three pillars of the ASEAN community, and it relates to ASEAN's livelihood, national and regional economies, so fisheries are critical to ASEAN food security. Based on the data that I have got from the ASEAN Secretariat, it plays an important role in the economic development of the ASEAN region, generating around 1.78 billion US dollar to 11.6 billion US dollar in intra-ASEAN and extra-ASEAN export in 2020. In terms of fisheries production, the ASEAN region accounts for 18% total of world fish production, whereas 6 ASEAN member states, Indonesia, Myanmar, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia, are among the world's top fish producing countries. So, and according to the ASEAN Secretariat Human Rights Division, the recent regulatory proposal by the EU in February 2022 on mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence for businesses has informed a new policy direction which would affect European businesses as well as those in their supply chain. Implications for greater compliance with could be anticipated for businesses in the ASEAN region. So in essence, the EU's legislation will have a big impact on the fishery industry in ASEAN. First, additional costs for doing business for the companies, which would affect ASEAN-EU trade, especially ASEAN's exports, which the countries I have mentioned. However, as a small note, the products of the fishery industry from ASEAN only constitute 1%, only 1% of total ASEAN-EU trade. But of course, looking ahead, we will have to be optimistic that this 1% will increase. And with the HRDD legislation in the EU, it will of course affect ASEAN's effort to increase our fisheries exports to the European Union. Second, enhance human rights protection for people in the region, in EU and in ASEAN. And the development may also encourage further talks for an ASEAN HRDD mechanism. So, for that, two important aspects that I would like to share. First, about national legislation. If we want to go to a regional action plan on HRDD, which is ASEAN, each ASEAN member state would have to have a strong national legislation on it. So that after all ASEAN member states have its national legislation, then we can talk about an ASEAN regional mechanism. So to conclude, Mr. Moderator and friends and colleagues. First, I would say that the discussion on HRDD within ASEAN, with the global trend that we are witnessing, it must be taken as increasingly important, especially in the fishery industry, in particular to realize ASEAN as a people-centered and people-oriented ASEAN. And therefore, awareness is important within the ASEAN region so that each governments from ASEAN member states would be pushed to have a stronger national legislation on it. And once we have these national legislation, then we can start on promoting the importance of having standards on HRDD, which in the end, I think the end target is having an ASEAN mechanism on HRDD. So I think I'll stop here and look forward for further discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, His Excellency Ambassador Dery Aman, for sharing with us what ASEAN has done and also the challenges in adopting human rights due diligence. And I couldn't agree more with what the kind of solution that you presented, that understanding that ASEAN mechanism is still challenging. You know, to adopt human rights due diligence, you suggest that national legislation is a way to go. On that, I want to share that actually Southeast Asia countries are not really left behind, because Thailand already issued a National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights a couple of years ago. Indonesia is now developing the National Action Plan, which is hopefully to be released to this year. And Malaysia is also developing National Action Plan on Human Rights. And the development of these three countries hopefully will also encourage other countries in Southeast Asia. With that, I will now turn to our last speaker. After our last speaker deliver his remarks, we will have a question and answer. So please prepare your questions in advance so we can have more lively discussion. Our last speaker is Dr. Pham Quang Min. He is the Assistant Director, Sectoral Development Directorate, Head of Food, Agriculture, and Forestry Division of ASEAN Secretariat. It'll be great if you can deliver your remarks in about 8 minutes. So, Dr. Pham, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Patience. And first of all, I'd like to thank the coordinating ministries of Marine Affairs and Investments of Indonesia and the Foundation for International Human Rights Reporting Standards for also inviting us to this very important event. I would like also to express my sincere appreciation to the organizers for excellent hostings, arrangement, and the warm hospitality given to all of us today. I also received 3 questions from the organizers, right? And also allow me to also share with you some insights relating to the commitment of ASEAN in achieving the sustainable fisheries. ASEAN mechanisms thus also aim to increase the uptake of HRDDs and the anticipated implications of importing countries' growing demands on sustainable fisheries products. You know, just as mentioned by Ambassador Aman, right, there are lots of things related to the HRDD in the ASEAN regions. And at this point in time, right, we do not have any particular mechanism for HRDD in ASEAN. And also mentioned by Aman that maybe in order to set up the regional systems, the country in the ASEAN region, right, 10 ASEAN country member states also needs to develop the national mechanism in order to promote human rights, and then we also can set up the regional mechanisms on this topic. Ambassador Amam also mentioned about the importance of the fisheries sectors. It also plays an important role in the economic development in the ASEAN regions. And you see that it generates around 11 billion in extra ASEAN export earning in 2022 and 2020. That is a number from ASEC, and I think that's the export of ASEAN in terms of fishery is very important at that point in time. Right? Regarding the question on the commitments of ASEAN to achieve the sustainable fisheries and implementing respect of the human rights, including carrying out the SRDD, as already mentioned, right, at this point in time, we do not have any regional mechanisms for SRDD at the ASEAN levels. However, under the operation in fisheries, the ASEAN sector working groups on fisheries is responsible for providing tech support to the SOMA map, right? Because that's a senior official meeting to support the ASEAN Minister on Agriculture and Forestry, promoting regional cooperation in fisheries, which also includes the implementation of the strategic plans of action on fisheries cooperation 2021 and 2025. Strategic plans also outline a lot of important activity, right? Priority actions of the fishery sectors, and also focus on enhancing trade and market access, enhancing fisheries production using sustainable technologies, ensuring food security and safety, and also increasing the resilience of climate change and natural shocks. You know, that's in 2016, right? ASEAN and SIDEX, also Southeast Asia Fishery Development Center based in Thailand, also adopted the joint declaration on regional cooperation on combating IUU fishing and enhancing the competitiveness of ASEAN fish and fishery products. I think that this declaration also reaffirms ASEAN commitment, strong commitment from ASEAN to combat IUU fishing and enhance the competitiveness of the fisheries sectors by strengthening the monitoring, control and surveillance or MIC system, enhancing the traceability systems, managing the fishing capacity, and promoting post-step measures. In this connection, right, the ASEAN sector bodies, relevant sector bodies in ASEAN, such as Senior Official Meeting on Transnational Crimes, and the ASEAN Committee on Migrant Workers, and the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights as key players in upholding the commitment to protect the human rights and welfare of migrant workers in the Southeast Asian fishery allied. You also may wish to note that ASEAN already adopted the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration that reaffirms our adherence to promoting and protects human rights and its fundamental freedoms. In addition, right, the ASEAN Declaration on Protection and Promotion of Rights of Migrant Workers also adopted, calling for country of origins and destination to ensure the dignities of migrant workers by outlining their obligation in the areas of protection from exploitation, discrimination and violence, labor migrations, governance, and the fight against traffic in person. On ASEAN mechanisms that aim to increase the uptake of SRDD by companies and ASEAN member countries. You know, that's under the Food, Agriculture and Cooperation. Standards on good agricultural and animal husbandry practices are already in place. These standards also contain promotes safe and healthy working conditions, including the promotion of gender equality and the observation of the ILO's Convention and recommendation on child labors. The voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty eradication call for the progressive realization of the rights of small-scale fishers and fish workers to an adequate standard of living, and to work in accordance with the international and national human rights standards. Under fisheries cooperation, I believe that Indonesia is taking the lead to develop a strategy to support the member state in implementing these guidelines. As it states, the ASEAN Secretariat is proactively discussing with the member state and partners to implement a project on addressing labor exploitation in fishing in ASEAN. The project aims to enhance ASEAN capacity to coordinate and collaborate to address forced labor and promote responsible labor practices in fishing industries. We also hope that through this implementation of the project, the capacity of ASEAN to address forced labor and abusive working conditions in the fishing industry and ASEAN engagement with private sector actors to address the forced labor will be also improved. And this will be a very important initiative to increase uptake of the SRTT by companies in ASEAN member countries. Regarding to questions that the anticipated implications of importing countries' growing demands on sustainable fishery products from South Asian country fishery industries. You know that IU fishing is one of the most serious threats to sustainable exploitation of living aquatic resources. In reality, several importing countries have imposed strict restrictions to exporting countries calling to cooperate in fighting IU fishing. To address these concerns, ASEAN countries also continue to engage with partners to implement various initiatives related to combating IU fishing. For example, we are now also working with different partners to implement the ASEAN cash documentation scheme for marine capture fishery. We also discussed about the establishments of the regional fishing vessels record to provide a database of fishing vessels of 24 meters in length. We also discussed on the establishments of the online interactive platform for ASEAN network for combating IU fishing. I think that is recently this network also proposed by Thailand. And we support from EU. Right? We already discussed on the interactive platforms and how to share information through this IU fishing network. ASEAN also try to implement the ASEAN regional plans of action for management of fishing capacity, which aim to facilitate the development of appropriate fishing capacity management measures. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, you also may wish to recall that just a few days ago, the WTO members also secured the unprecedented package of the trade outcome at the 12th Ministerial Conference in Geneva on 17th of June 2022. I think that's this morning one of our speakers also mentioned about this outcome of the WTO's the Ministerial Conference. Right? The package also confirms the historical importance of the multilateral trading system and underlines important roles of the WTO in addressing the world's most pressing issues. At this ministerial conference, an agreement on fishery subsidies was adopted to introduce comprehensive and effective disciplines that prohibit certain forms of fisheries subsidies. That also contributes to overcapacities and overfishing, and eliminates subsidies that's also contributing to the IU fishing. We expected that the agreement will also further support our efforts in addressing human rights issues so as to increase the competitiveness and sustainability of the South Asia fishing industries. To this end, I would like to also acknowledge the valuable contribution of the Coordinating Ministry of the Maritime Affairs and Investment of Indonesia as a foundation of international human rights reporting standards in introduce a platform for governments fishery companies and civil society organizations to exchange information on the fishery businesses and related human rights issues. Also to increase the competitiveness and sustainability of the Southeast Asia fishing industries. With that, I'd like to again try to thank all of you to participating in these very important forums. And I also wish you a productive and meaningful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pham, for sharing with us the efforts that ASEAN Secretariat has done related with this issue, particularly on combating IUU fishing, because we know combating IUU fishing is one of the most efficient way to ensure sustainable fisheries, because combating IUU fishing means we are also protecting the rights of fishers, because IUU fishing was related with human rights violation in the fishery industry. So now we have around 20 minutes for discussion, because we will extend this session until 12:30 because we have a wonderful group of speakers. I will give the floor first to the audience in this room who meet in person. Any question from the floor? Please kindly introduce your name, also organization you work for.
Thank you very much, Bahtiar Manurung. My name is Chahyo, and sustainability of law and representative from the Coordinating Ministry of Maritime Investment. Business and human rights has become a regular subject of discussion in the UN. For instance, Business and Human Rights International Conference conducted by UN in Geneva. Indonesia actively contribute in the conference. And Indonesia also creating several national regulations and maximum effort to ratify international convention in order to conduct international commitment related with the human rights. We need to respond from speaker about two aspects. The first is from Bapak Dery Aman related with the strategy roadmap of regulation or legislation making process for Southeast Asian country altogether to ratify international convention. For instance, ILO Convention 188 and Cape Town Agreement 2012.
As we know that in 2019, more than 50 states commit to ratify 2012 convention by October 11, 2012. So, hopefully, Singapore is also to the content of advancing national time. And secondly, for Kevin Lehman, it's possibility of investing from this forum, Southeast Asia Forum on Sustainable Capture Fisheries, and to discuss Vancouver in business and human rights conference in more global scale in the UN. That's two questions.
Thank you very much. Pak Nur Cahyo, can you repeat the second question for Pak Kevin, please?
Okay, the second question is possibility from this forum of the recommendation related with the topic of Southeast Asia Forum on Sustainable Capture Fisheries to encourage to discuss more further in the business and human rights conference in the more global scale in the UN. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Nur Cahyo, for your questions. I think I will give the first chance to His Excellency Dery Aman.
Thank you very much for the question. Honestly, I am not too aware to the related issue, since it is more of a multilateral issue under the UN, especially within the ILO in Geneva. However, I just would like to give a general response. In terms of the agreement and ratification of ASEAN member states towards an international convention. It is more of a national driven position rather than a common ASEAN position to agree towards a certain international convention. However, there are some cases where ASEAN member states with the common interest that this certain international convention is something which all ASEAN member states feel and see that it is important, and there is a need for an ASEAN common position to react, respond, or to ratify, to agree towards an international convention, then there is a possibility for ASEAN to have a common position towards a certain convention. But if there is no need and view or urgency to have that, then all ASEAN member states have their sovereign rights, their national rights to react and respond towards the process of finalizing an international convention. So I think that would be my general response with regard to the specific ILO convention that is being put forward. Again, I'm not in a position to provide any views or comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, His Excellency, for answering that question. I'll now turn to Kevin Lehman to answer the second question. Can we have Kevin on the screen, please?
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, could you please repeat the question? I think there's some either connection or audio issues. So if you mind repeating the question, that would be much appreciated.
Right. If I get it correctly, and then I'm gonna ask Pak Nur Cahyo help again if I didn't really get the question correctly. I think Pak Nur Cahyo was asking if there is a possibility to encourage Southeast Asia countries to more involved on the global level discussion, and how to do that.
I'm sorry, I think there are some audio issues because it is quite inaudible. Maybe if you could type the question, then I can...
Right, no, I will repeat again. Kevin, how do you think the Southeast Asia countries can involve more on the global level on these human rights due diligence issues, and then to in turn also will, advance the implementation of SRDD in Southeast Asia?
Okay, I see it's put in the chat. Okay, how can Southeast Asia countries be more involved in HRDD? Thank you very much. Okay, so I think there's a few roles that governments can play in aligning their economies to these HRDD trends and making companies more resilient and rights respecting. I think one of the first is to provide guidance and to educate companies about what does it mean to conduct human rights due diligence, and then also taking the human rights due diligence process from the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the UNGPs, and translating that into a national context. So really looking at what issues do companies in my specific country face in particular, and then how do we respond to that. I think second of all, governments can of course regulate human rights due diligence issues, and they can ensure policy coherence. So sometimes what we see is that, for example, when companies want to respect human rights, there needs to be, say, an alignment of government policy to ensure that companies have the right incentives to respect human rights. And so in this context, for example, if we look at national action plans on fishery and human rights, they're a great tool for ensuring this policy coherence, so that different legislation and policies applicable to companies provide the right incentives and enable companies, to respect human rights. And then this, of course, also allows governments and economies in general to really ensure that their economies are aligned with these international standards. And then, of course, this may include ratifying labor conventions, or it might also include when concluding trade or investment treaties, ensuring that governments have adequate policy space to then regulate companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Now there is a question from the audience joining online from Pak Jaki Mubarak. He is an official from Ministry of Fisheries Affairs. I think the question is directed to Dr. Fan. Kindly answer this question for about 1 or 2 minutes. He would like to see further analysis between the connection between fisheries subsidized and human rights in the fisheries sector. Dr. Fan.
Thank you, for very interesting question. In fact, right now also first decision from the ministerial conference at the WTO, and they also mentioned that the subsidies in the fishery sector is quite important to protect and to enhance the agriculture. So you also think that plus this is also related to the labor issue. If also subsidies also support for this kind of subsidies. So I think that in order to see the connection between the subsidies and the human rights, we may do assessment in order to see what will be the impacts of the subsidies to the human rights matters. But for the subsidies, lots of discussion around this topic, not only for the fishery sector, but also for agricultural sectors. While developing countries also try to provide lots of subsidies for different, for agriculture, for the fishing industries, and maybe the assessment is to highlight the illegal, for example. I'm not sure how to address the term, but it provides lots of subsidies to the fishing industry. That's why the minister only committed to reduce the subsidy in the fishing industries. And at this point, I don't think, I try to think what will be the relation between the two, but I try to focus on the labor issue and forced labor in this aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pham, for answering that. I guess what I can say is that because this one just issue last week, we will need to watch out, the development. I'll now give the chance to Anita. Can give us, advice or recommendation for governments and business in Southeast Asia? What are the practical approaches that they have to do to anticipate and meet this growing trend on industrial diligence?
Thanks so much for that question, Dr. And I was also really heartened to hear the comments that came from Ambassador Yuri talking about human rights due diligence legislation, the interest, the discussion at ASEAN and also at Indonesian levels. So I would say that, investors actually have come together as early as 2020, approaching governments to say that what they're asking for is moving away from voluntary principles, but to the mandatory principles. I think, investors have wanted to come about to say, we're an important financial actor. We actually enable, industries to move forward, and on that basis, we should have a voice at the table. So the Investor Alliance have been really talking to the investor community to say, what is it that you want related to human rights due diligence? And we actually got a very strong response. We have an investor statement with investments over 6 trillion, representing over 6 trillion in assets under management, saying that we want to see governments pass mandatory legislation relating to human rights and environmental due diligence. These investor statements have been, a lot of them have been focused on the EU because of the momentum there, but I would love to be able to share that with ASEAN, with governments in Asia, for them to hear from a different stakeholder group on and an important stakeholder, and to help to also amplify the calls from communities, from civil society on the importance of respecting human rights and using the human rights due diligence process. So, that would be my sort of recommendation to governments, and to feel the need to really engage with the investor community as well as an extra voice to support the agendas towards really protecting people and planet. For businesses, I think we want to see businesses really sort of step up. They have been in a situation where I guess for a long time have been able to grow their businesses with a very sort of capitalistic sort of viewpoint, but really understanding over the recent years that that is not going to enable us to have a sustainable, resilient future. So there are calls now from all all corners of rights holders, from communities, impacted communities, from governments, from investors, from financial areas to say, businesses, you are responsible for and must be held accountable for your actions. And so we would really encourage businesses who have enterprise risk management systems already in place to address all sorts of risks, to include into that enterprise risk management systems human rights risk management through the human rights due diligence process, and to make that really an integral and essential part of enterprise risk management, to provide more disclosure and transparency on those issues, and to look at it not just from the perspective of the company and your operations, but really your whole value chain, from who you sell to, and as well, and the human rights performance of customers to suppliers as well. So through your whole value chain. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Anita. We are running out of time, but I'm going to still give all of the speakers like 30 seconds to one minute closing statement about your observation of this session, about human rights due diligence and new normal, how it can help ensuring sustainable fisheries. So I'll start with His Excellency dari Aman. 30 seconds to 1 minute.
Thank you once again, Pak Bahtiar Manurung, as our moderator. I would say that based on our discussion in this session, it is even more clearer for all of us that this growing trend, this global trend, is something that for us in the developing countries, and especially for us in ASEAN member states, to anticipate and be ready, because it would have an impact towards the development and the interests of ASEAN member states, for ASEAN, the region, and also for developing countries. And a lot of political issues are related in this, as my colleague from the ASEAN Secretariat has mentioned about the agreement at the ministerial level in the WTO to connect or to link subsidies on fisheries with human rights. This is something new, but again, in the end, it's about economics. It's about the benefits that countries may get. So they are putting forward certain conditionalities or restrictions towards advancement of certain exporting countries, and in this case, for fisheries, we need to look further what the EU is going to do, and we already witnessed on palm oil, on goat sugar oils. I think on this fisheries issue is almost the same what we are facing with the palm oil with their legislation in the European Union. So for ASEAN, besides having a regional mechanism, is how we can protect our interests, in this case our economic development and our trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, His Excellency. Now I will turn to Dr. Pham.
Closing statement, 1 minute. Thank you.
Fishery sector is cross-cutting issue. In ASEAN, we have three pillars, including the political security pillars, economic pillars, and also social cultural pillars. And when we also prepare the presentation for this meeting, we also have to collect information from different pillars. That one is one of the challenges for us, and I also believe that for human rights, it's also not only cross-state pillar, but also international country. So we also have different ministries to deal with the human rights issues and the peace ministries. So again, I would like to also emphasize that as a regional levels, we do not have any mechanisms for the SRPD. So we also expected that from the country levels. If the member state also set up a strong system as we also can start from there. We can also learn experience from the member states and then see what will be the best practices for the SRPDs to apply in this country as a regional levels. From our section, from ASEAN sectors, we also try to facilitate these very interesting topics. We also hope that this discussion today will also give lots of recommendations and suggestions for the ASEAN regions, for the countries, and how to what this is the potential of this. With that, I would like to thank again to we also expect to have more discussion on this topic in the future. Thank you.
I will now turn to our Minister Masato to deliver 1 minute closing statement. Can we have Minister Masato on the screen?
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure for me to attend this meeting today, and I really believe that as a country of Japan that receives many foreign workers in the fishery industry, it is very important to protect the human rights of workers, not only Japanese but also the foreign, including Indonesian. And I think that this HERE is a very good approach to address this issue. And I hope that this notion will grow further in Japan. And also, it is also important to have these kind of notions in the entire global chain. And I'm very encouraged that the ASEAN countries are also very thinking this very seriously. So I think that it is very important to keep our cooperation going on and have more actual action on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Masato. Now I'll give the floor to Kevin.
Thank you very much. I think one thing that I would want to highlight is that for both companies and governments, it will be important to focus on how to make human rights due diligence meaningful. And what I mean by that is human rights due diligence in itself is just a process. But what we really need in the end is better outcomes for people and planet. So as Anita mentioned, we need to focus on risks to people and planet and not just risks to business. For example, we already have a lot of social auditing initiatives. But often they fail to make a difference on the ground. We need to improve working conditions. And doing this is also in the best interest of companies, right? If they approach human rights due diligence as a check-the-box exercise, perhaps not much will change on the ground. And it's quite possible that companies subject to human rights due diligence legislation will not comply with their legal requirements if their suppliers, say the ones in Southeast Asia, take such a check-the-box approach. So, and then this opens up all the risks I mentioned before, including on the big decoupling of global supply chains, as well as reputational risks to companies and difficulties in gaining investments. So really, I would like to implore everyone to consider how to facilitate meaningful HRED. HRED makes a difference to people and planet. Thank you, and I wish you successful further discussions today.
Thank you, Kevin. Last one, Anita.
Thanks, and to those of for coming here from New York, we've been really having a lot of discussions at the EU and the US government level. Really heartened to be in this environment where I'm here with governments, representatives, different stakeholders across Southeast Asia. The interest and the commitment to really move that agenda forward has been very moving for me, very encouraging for me. The need for these sorts of discussions where we have different stakeholders to raise the issues and to make those connections really enable us to move that agenda forward. Investors want to be part of that process to really look for resilience and sustainable social contracts between our social development for all of us. So thank you very much for this session. It was amazing for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. With that, we are going to close this session. Apologies for if we cannot take all of the questions from the floor and also those from joining us virtually. I'd like to thank all of the great speakers for delivering great remarks and also for participants for being part of this wonderful session. Thank you for your participation. Please enjoy the rest of the forum.
We thank all the speakers here for the insightful and interesting discussion. Before we continue with the next session, we will take a lunch break. The lunch will be located at the Green Benua restaurant. The same restaurant would be breakfast. The lunch will be for an hour and a half, so we'll meet again in this room at 14 o'clock. It is Indonesia time or Singapore time, and 1 o'clock Jakarta time. So see you after the break.
Apa